All right, welcome, Jason. And
Thanks for
um,
having me. Been a fan of your blog for a long time.
okay, so we're going to try to discuss the future of the tech industry over the next 10 years. Something that's very easy and we're going to be absolutely certain about without any doubt. Um, and I wanted to start out since you're in this sort of progress space, which is this um, I don't know, I'd call it a cult, but I think of a small group of very bright people, very admirable people who seem to care a lot about this. I can think of Tyler Cowen as one, Peter Thiel as one, Mark Andreessen as one, Patrick Collison. I mean, if the world were like those people, we would probably make a lot of progress. There's some very, very bright, very hardworking people. Um, so let's just start out with um, a topic that occurred to me because Christopher Mims wrote this piece yesterday in the Wall Street Journal about things he'd gotten wrong. And one of the things he claims that he was wrong about was he sort of uh, overestimated the prospects of disruption, the concept of disruption. And what's the role of disruption in progress? What have you found there? Is it the be all and end all? Is it less important than
Well,
people think? What's the deal with disruption?
let's see. So we should define our terms carefully. So the term disruption got popular in tech, I think, mostly through Clayton Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma, where he talked about sustaining versus disruptive innovation. Now, those are technical terms that were defined very precisely, and he was talking specifically about two types of innovation. The term has become like all successful concepts, it spread so far so fast that it got diluted and is does not mean anything nearly so precise or profound as it used to. So most people use the term disruption to just sort of mean any kind of a big change. Um,
So what did he mean originally?
yeah, so it was a really very interesting theory. Sustaining innovation essentially is innovation that appeals to the same customer base that the company already has. And disruptive innovation does not appeal to the same customer base, but appeals to a new one. So in the computer industry, which both you and I, Arnold, are familiar with, um, you know, when PCs came along, personal computers came along, they were not interesting to the people who were already using mini computers and mainframes because they were less powerful. They didn't fit into the same kind of uses, but they were very interesting to a totally new class of users. So this sort of thing has happened over and over again in the computing industry that something comes along, but he points out other examples of this in his book. One of them he talks about the backhoe industry, I think it is. So when backhoes went from I'm gonna get some of the details wrong here. When backhoes went from being they had a certain type of control mechanism or power mechanism, and then they replaced it with a different type of power mechanism that just made it, I don't know, cheaper, more powerful, or something along those lines. Oh yeah, sure. The usage of backhoe is definitely one of those things. But then later they came along with some other kind of new type of backhoe that was smaller and was less powerful. And this is often the pattern of disruption. And the existing backhoe customers said, I don't want a smaller, less powerful backhoe. What am I going to do with that? But there were other contractors who were like, oh, if I had one of those tiny ones, I could use it on these jobs where right now I can't use any kind of backhoe because I can't get the machine in because I'm just doing something in a personal backyard or something. And so this whole new market was created. Anyway, that was what disruption was about. So it was a really interesting theory, and he showed how the incumbents keep getting disrupted by startups because the startups would come along and the startups would find a brand new market that the incumbents weren't paying attention to. Maybe even a market with lower profit margins, but still they would come along and ultimately often the what would happen was the the old market would get eaten up from the bottom, right? Like with the market for mini computers and mainframes is gone now because the PCs got so powerful that now you can use it, for all those other things. Now, what happened was Christensen's book comes out in the, I don't remember, 80s, 90s, a couple decades ago. Everybody in tech has read it now. It's a classic. And so now what happens is the big incumbents know about disruption theory and they know how to recognize what's going on and potentially avoid it. And so I think disruption actually happens less now because the book was written and now everybody knows the phenomenon and doesn't let it happen to them, or at least not nearly as much as they used to.
Okay. I think um, and I don't know if you had time to read Mim's story because it
I
just came
haven't.
out. Yeah. Uh, my sense would, and maybe this relates to what you just said, is he says that we're just not seeing that with things like Facebook and Amazon and Google. And and hearing you say that, that might be just because they're watching out where this innovation could be coming from and then stepping in right away. That'd be sort of a good story. A bad story would be that maybe there just isn't as much opportunity to disrupt, or maybe that disruption isn't so important and these guys can just hang in there because they've got so much power in their marketplaces that they can't be disrupted.
I don't see that. I mean, in a certain so okay, think about where do people get their information? 20 years ago, they got their information by going online and searching, and they would search and find some web pages. So Google was extremely powerful in that sense. They had the best search engine, everybody was going to them. Okay. Then social media comes along, and social media was sort of a disruptive force in a certain sense, in that it took away people's attention and became a new different source of information. Now, Google saw this happening and they tried to have a social network or two or three of them, but never really made it work. Um, and it's very hard for a company to sort of make that leap, right? To go from being the best search engine to then somehow creating the best social network. They just don't have the corporate, they don't have the capacity or the skill or the vision or the culture or whatever it takes, right? So,
Yeah.
okay, so a bunch of social networks came along. Now, Zuckerberg at least was smart enough to, recognize that other social networks might replace, some of what he has done. And so he bought up some of them when they were, on the like Instagram, right? Which
Yeah.
was seen as such a, he bought Instagram for like $1 billion. And at the time that was seen as, this extraordinary, outrageous price to pay. Of course, it's turned into an incredible asset for them. And also $1 billion is like the minimum interesting acquisition size now. So things move rapidly. Now, both social media and search, I think, are being challenged by AI, and both Google and Facebook and everybody else realizes this, but none of them were the ones that created, none of them are the ones that are really on the forefront. I mean, they're putting a lot of investment into it, right? And they have very advanced models. But if you look at who's coming out with the most interesting stuff, it seems to be the startups, the new players like OpenAI and Anthropic. But Facebook and Google are not nearly as far behind as maybe in the past the incumbent would have been, more far behind the competitor.
Yeah, well, I think Google's sort of in an interesting position in that they basically got this thing started. I mean, their team wrote the paper on generative, GPTs in some sense.
The Transformer paper, yeah, that
Yeah,
was to the current. Yep.
that puts them to me in the same historical position as Xerox, right?
Yeah, it's
Xerox
a good analogy.
invented, the laser printer, the personal computer, all that stuff, and famously or infamously could not capitalize on them.
On the PC, true. They did, by the way, I think it's important to note, make a lot of money on the laser printer. And
Okay.
I think they made enough money on the laser printer to pay for all of Park. So Park was not a failure, but
Yeah.
it's true that they essentially created the PC, including the GUI and and all that stuff within Park, and then they made a PC. They tried to
Yeah.
commercialize. I think really they just kind of set the price point too high. It should,
Star Office
yeah,
was
that's
what it
right.
was.
It was like a $10,000,
Right.
PC, right? It was just the kind
Yeah.
of the wrong, yeah, so.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean that is an interesting story. And that I think that relates to our question today is sort of, are these tech firms, the big tech firms, agile enough? Or is, yeah, I guess that's the question. Are they agile enough to keep up with AI, or are they going to be
Yeah, I mean,
focused elsewhere?
it's funny, so we think about this sometimes in terms of agility versus resources, the big
Exactly.
companies have lots of resources to put in, but the startups are so agile, I wonder if the actual thing that startups have that incumbents don't, that lets the startups, run laps around, sometimes, is just they have a great founder. And whoever's running the initiative within the big company is just not founder caliber. I
Yeah.
don't know if that's really the main explanation, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's the main explanation, right?
So you have so you have this
People think that,
personality, like a founder personality, like I've just got to be absolutely in charge. I can't be in a bureaucracy. And then um and then you've got this company, you can only have one of those guys in some sense in the company. And then below that is a bureaucracy. So if I'm sitting inside Google and I've got this great idea, or what I think is a great idea, and I just want to run with it, I have to walk through the bureaucracy and I just leave. So, or if the bureaucracy tries to execute the idea, that they can't do it with the same energy.
yeah, I mean, I think there's some truth in all of those things. There's also there's always the strategy tax. So an idea being developed within a large corporation has to integrate into the corporation's strategy somehow. Um, Whereas a new idea being, created by a startup doesn't have the strategy tax. It
Right.
can, right? So if Google develops AI, they're going to think about, oh, how do we use AI to make better search, right? And maybe they've got enough vision to think in the future people will not be using search as we know it will go away, and people will just be asking AIs for information. But they're still going to be thinking in terms of people will seek out information on the internet, and maybe now they will get it through AI instead of 10 blue links. How do we use AI to make search better? How do we use AI to make Google Docs better? How do we use AI to make, whereas a startup will come along and they'll just think of something totally outside that
Right.
worldview, right? Because they're just not encumbered with a bunch of existing products and businesses that they want to think about how will this get enhanced or even replaced, and then come up with something totally wacky, completely out of left field, right?
Yeah.
Um, that
So
turns out,
you mentioned resources versus agility. The thing about AI that people talk about is that it's going to take tremendous resources, right?
yeah, sure. I
The
mean, at least it does for now. I mean, it takes an enormous amount of compute and an enormous amount of energy, um, because we have very inefficient. I mean, we have relatively inefficient processes for actually creating the AI, like to train it. And then even running it right now, I mean, is not super efficient. So yeah, it's a high resource consumption service right now.
could is there any way to build on it? I mean, something like, with Apple, it was the apps that somehow made made the smartphone something that everybody wanted to get. And I assume some people made money creating these apps.
Sure.
Um, is is that harder to do with this AI stuff, or is that going to happen? Or
It's already happening. These companies have APIs, and people are already building tons of stuff on top of the APIs. Um,
so is that going to increase the power of the big companies, or is some of the sort of revenue and value going to flow out to the people who develop these applications?
um, my gut reaction is probably both, just as in the era of the mobile, the smartphone, right? Apple made a bunch of money, but also app developers, benefited a lot, and some of them made a bunch of money. Um, I mean, so there's couple considerations. So one thing is right now the AI models take an enormous amount of compute to train, to create them, but then much less compute to just run one after it's trained, right? So that's part of why right now we're seeing this kind of concentrated in a few very large orgs with enormous amounts of resources, because they can put that investment into all the billions of dollars of compute needed to train it, right? Um, I think, these orgs know that they're not going to be able to create all the products that are going to be made possible by this, and that's why they are opening APIs, and they're not planning to just sort of, I mean, the way to think about AI is it's more of a central enabling technology. It's like some kind of an engine, right? It's not a product. Right now we have AI chatbots and we chat with them, fine. But the future of AI is not just better and better chatbots that we chat more and more with. It's AI will be more and more under the hood. It will be I mean, so already, for instance, it's getting integrated into the tools that software developers use to write code, right?
Yeah.
That's not a chatbot. They're not, I mean, sometimes developers are chatting with a chatbot in order to help them with their coding. But there's a different type of tool that I don't know how much people have seen, where it actually starts writing the code for you, or it'll suggest a little bit of code and you can accept or reject the suggestion. You can go in and edit it. It's more like typing side by side with another, programmer who's much faster at typing than you are, and I can just and so
Yeah.
that's one form of it. And I think AI will get integrated into, medicine and law and accounting and yeah, I don't know. I mean, all sorts of things. And it won't look like chatbots.
Yeah.
Sometimes it'll look like a better way of creating a document. I mean, I think one user interface paradigm or interaction paradigm that needs to get developed and will get developed with AI is not chatting back and forth, question and answer, but here is a document or some other artifact or product that we are working on, and we're gonna you and the AI are gonna work on it together iteratively, with you putting in a little bit of direction here and there, and then the AI doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And that could be design, art, like we kind of do. You have AI image generation today. Eventually, it'll be entire, comic books and video and movies, and one person will be able to create an entire, cinematic,
Yeah.
feature-length film by themselves with the AI, just telling them what they want and iterating on it.
And as another category, but again, use this concept of being an engine would be robots that,
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
just being able to program a robot and to have the robot also have some initial intuition itself, that could be a really big deal
Yeah,
also. So,
but the other thing,
so that makes it kind of like analogous to what in the past? Analogous to an operating system, analogous to
yeah, maybe. I mean,
electricity. I don't know what.
yeah, I mean, these historical analogies are hard to figure out. I mean, I feel like it is to information almost something like a new type of engine is to, energy in the physical world, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Um, it's this underlying technology that can sort of make a whole lot of things happen. Now, so back to the question about will the incumbents have more power or not? Another question is what happens with open source, right? So Facebook seems to want to put an enormous amount of investment into building these models and then just essentially give them away. Because Facebook is not planning on capturing the value of the core model itself. Facebook wants to build better social products that will engage and capture people's attention, and they think they can just give away the core. So maybe the incumbents will not have a lot of power, because it will turn out that the key stuff, the assets, just get open sourced and given away to the world. It could also turn out that once we get better and better, once we get better at once we make the AI more efficient itself, and also we just get better and better compute resources, it could turn out that the cost of these things just comes way down. And so eventually, you won't need so many billions of dollars to create or to run, one of these things. So I could see all those ways that currently a few extremely large incumbents have a lot of power. I could see a number of different ways that that power would get reduced over time.
So in terms of just their existing businesses, leaving AI aside, I think there's a case that there's some decay or stagnation or reaching an asymptote in some of these companies. Couple of things like people have pointed out that Google has really had to cannibalize itself to meet its earning targets. It had to lay off people. It had to put more ads on the page. And Facebook might be in the same position. I mean, how much more growth do they have in their core business?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's part of why Facebook is expanding into, right? They want to build the metaverse, right?
Right,
They want to create VR, and they want to be at the forefront of this AI stuff. And there could be an enormous amount at the intersection of AI and social, right?
right.
Um,
And Apple is kind of, they put out this Vision Pro as kind of an attempt to sort of leap past their core business, which is another sign that their core business isn't going to grow. And yet another sign, which I think Tyler pointed this out, when these companies start doing stock buybacks and paying dividends, I think, in some sense that message is, we don't have a high rate of return investment internally the company. You can have, you guys can go out and get the average return and beat us if we give you the money. So, that could be a sign that their sort of main business is
sure.
stagnating.
Sure. I mean, all of these things go through a sort of S curve, right, where it's exponential growth for a while and then it
Yeah,
plateaus. Um, and any one technology or business line or anything will go through a curve like that. And the only way that anything keeps growing is that once you start to level off, you jump to the next S curve, right? You find something
right.
new to do. But companies tend to be able to do this as long as the founder is still involved and very active, right? So again, this comes back to my theory that it's just, do you have the right leader in place who has the whatever personal qualities it takes to not want to just milk the cow, right? But to
Mm.
the cash cow, right? But to actually find some new exciting thing.
Well, poor Apple, they tried that, right, with this Vision Pro, but I think that landed with a thud so far. Or what's your view?
I don't know. I haven't had a chance to try it myself. It sounds pretty cool. It also sounds, I mean, it's early, right? I don't think you can necessarily judge it yet. You certainly can't judge the impact of VR yet. It's still extremely early. The I mean, developers haven't had time to really figure out what this is all about and create amazing apps. I mean, it was, think about how long from the time that the iPhone came out, 2007, to the time that some of the, the things that really, like Uber and Lyft, right? So these apps that let you call, cars, which is just totally enabled by smartphones, right? Those businesses are completely dependent on smartphones, but those didn't even launch until 2, 3 years in to the
Mhm.
iPhone. So I think it's too early to sort of judge whether VR is a flop or not.
Okay.
But I do think that, by the way, but that Apple, I mean, after Jobs, right? I don't see Apple as necessarily having that kind of visionary leader who can help them figure out what the next big thing is and jump to it, right? Amazon after Bezos, right? I mean, under Bezos, Amazon not only created an enormous retail empire, right? They also invented, I mean, they created the Kindle, right? So one of the first and most successful ebook readers. They created Amazon Web Services, which was a
Right.
huge thing. They created Amazon Prime, which now has a video, whole video empire, right? Movie and TV making empire and everything, right? So there's all that stuff. Will Amazon keep doing those things? I don't know. Amazon has some of the best culture of any company, especially when it comes to innovation, right? They really built that into. Um, Bezos had this whole thing about how it's still day one As
Yeah,
there's that day one mentality, right? It's always day one. It's so that might last for a while, especially as long as Bezos is still alive. Google, I don't know as much. The founders are still involved, but I don't know how actively they're involved exactly, and it doesn't, I mean, I don't.
yeah, yeah. It must be that kind of an empire must be hard to manage. I mean, I think
Yeah,
Bezos has figured out some structure that could keep these entities kind of coordinated, but
yeah.
the Google empire seems hard to manage.
Um, and then yeah, I don't know. I mean, like Microsoft, obviously Gates is sort of long gone. Um, Still around in the background. Um, you know, um, but I feel like I would more expect there to be, major kind of new innovations coming out of Facebook, or where Zuck is still involved, or out of something like OpenAI or whatever, right?
Yeah. Okay. Um, all right. Well,
Sometimes, so I mean, in terms of that, a company's business is maybe petering out, and they don't know what to do, and maybe they're giving dividends and stuff, right, and doing stock buybacks. Well, every technology and industry goes to that S curve. Every business line goes through that S curve. Somebody's going to jump to the next S curve. It could come from within a company if they still have the visionary leader who can see the next thing. And if it doesn't come from them, it'll come from some startup who comes along and finds the next thing and leaves them behind. But it's going to come from somebody.
okay. Let me tell people in the audience if you want to sort of raise your hand and come up with a question, either the physical hand or the virtual hand, feel free to do so. Um, but meanwhile, keep keep plugging away here. What about the resource issue? Is can VCs supply enough resources, or are VCs out of the game right now in AI? And I think Moses Sternstein made that argument, or somebody's made that argument that the VCs can't get into the AI game the way they could get into some of these others.
I don't know what that argument is. I mean, there's an enormous amount of private capital, capital available on private markets these days, right? Compared to where things were 15, 20 years ago. Um, a lot of money has left the public markets. A lot of it is accumulated. There's a lot sloshing around in private market. You couldn't raise $1 billion, you know, round of financing on private markets 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, so so I'm surprised to hear anybody say, "Oh, the VCs don't have the money for it." Now, maybe he was thinking of a certain class of VCs. I mean, some of these, a lot of the if you want to raise $1 billion, you're probably out talking to sovereign wealth funds, right? You're probably talking to Saudi Arabia.
Mhm.
You're talking to folks like that. So if you're making a distinction between, certain Silicon Valley VCs versus those other private funds, okay, sure, maybe. But then what do the VCs do? Well, the VCs invest early, before you need to raise the $1 billion, right? You generally don't raise $1 billion out of the gate. You
Yeah.
raise your, millions or tens of millions in your first round, and then maybe hundreds of millions in the next round, and so forth. So VCs are still funding those early rounds. Plus, again, not everybody is going to need to build one of these enormous foundation models that takes billions of dollars to create. Some of them can can use those other models via APIs and create a product layer on top of them. Plus, some AI is going to be training brand new models that are not these language models, right? But are still using similar techniques and deep learning techniques, but are going to be training on other areas, whether it's images or biology or all kinds of things like that. So.
Yeah. What about the potential for the technology itself to concentrate power? Um, I think people think in terms of surveillance of one form or another, just getting so much information concentrated sort of one central place. Could that be sort of a source of a very concentrated industry?
Unclear to me. I mean, I'd have to. Sorry, you threw me off a little bit because I thought you were talking about concentration of political power, maybe, or
Well, it could be both political and economic. I mean, sort of if if this AI sort of knows what you're going to do before you do it, that creates a lot, both economic and political power over you.
yeah, I don't know. I don't think that's going to happen exactly. I mean, AI is not magic. I don't think it would get to know you. At most, I think it could get to know you as well as, some of the closest friends or family members in your life know you, right? But even they can't predict you perfectly.
Right.
And an AI is, yeah. So, I don't know. I mean, I do see there's clearly a lot of potential for abuse, especially within totalitarian societies, right, or authoritarian societies. You know, if you imagine a government is eavesdropping on all the communications of all of its people and trying to find threats and dissidents and so forth. And in the past, it had to do that through some crude algorithms that would flag a few keywords and then employ a whole lot of people to listen in on some conversations and, that kind of thing. And now it can essentially, at very low cost, hire, millions um, of
Spies.
of agents, right, or
Yeah.
whatever the right term is, um, to do a much more sophisticated job of listening in on everybody's conversation and highlight the actual, find the actual dissidents.
Yeah.
Then yeah, that's a threat. I mean, I think the long history of technology has been that it is if you put it in the hands of those who want to acquire power and they're allowed to do so, right, that more technology gives them more ability to rule over more people with a ever tighter iron fist over greater regions, right? Ancient, kings and emperors never had the ability to exercise such tight control over such a large area as dictators do today.
Yeah.
And so this will, this could enhance that.
Yeah. No, if you think about it, before 1800, it was really hard to control a large area. It was hard to you communicate over a large area. So you had to delegate it to, your lords or
Yes.
whoever.
A lot of a lot the central monarch relied a lot on delegation to local rulers, right? And that connection was always sort of tenuous and
Yeah. But yeah, there's definitely a potential for change on that front. So um, anyway, I'm not seeing any hands raised. I think we've batted this one around about as well as we're going to.
sure.
So, oh, I do see a hand go up. All right, so Steve W., you want to unmute and
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So, and you kind of said this, but I was just wondering if you could give a short and then maybe expand upon it if you wish, take on, are you optimistic or pessimistic on the current big tech giants in terms of market leadership and dominance going forward versus some type of disruptor? It could be someone who's existing, but just not one of the top 10, top 7, whatever. And then also maybe if you've got any viewpoint on their valuations, which to me seem really, really high right now, regardless of the fact that they are very good businesses.
Yeah. Well, I think I have a few random thoughts on that. First of all, I want to lean against them, right? My personal hope is for, new people to come in. I think, in some sense, what a great company has is a culture where they or another term for it is institutional knowledge. So, Amazon had, what we see in Amazon are the experiments that worked. AWS worked, Kindle worked. What you don't see are all the things that failed. And that, so like when I had my web business back in the prehistoric days of the 90s, I could sit there and watch people making the mistakes that I already knew were mistakes. And that was a huge advantage. And I think the legacy businesses, Facebook and so on, are going to have that advantage that they've all, because they are pretty experimental, so that they know all the paths not to go down. And I think that, and just having a culture that's working, they do have a culture that gets, they can get things done. They know how to put products out. They know how to avoid fatal errors. Those are big advantages that are pretty intangible and that people don't see. And the big disadvantage, on the other hand, I think, is the kind of the decay of the internal incentive structure, that gradually the people who rise up are people who, like Jason says, they're not as driven, they're not as original. You get a more conformist culture over time. The culture kind of decays. So those are my initial thoughts on that. Does that begin to answer your question, Steve?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, all right, then I'll let Jason
Yeah.
chime in.
I mean, I think we're already seeing that, the lead in AI seems to have been taken by the companies that were not previous incumbents, right? Like OpenAI. And like I said, the incumbents are not far behind. But I mean, so that already indicates that, I think both are going to do well. I don't think the incumbents are going to get totally destroyed and go away. They seem to be too smart and sort of have too much, there's enough savvy left in them and a lot of assets they still have. But I think it's clear that there's still just a lot of room for startups to come along. Now, I mean, is OpenAI still a startup, right? They've raised an enormous amount of money. They've been around for many years, and yet on the other hand, they still sort of seem like a startup in some sense.
Okay. So is that all right, Steve?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I just look at it and think about OpenAI is a really good example. It always, to me, struck as a little hollow when people would point out how MySpace is no longer around and Facebook, as a challenge to them. And I think it was always a good point, because I don't really buy into the market dominant forever and we've got to do something about them antitrust wise. But at the same time, really what changes to me is like a transformation on the technology end. So Apple's gone through many iterations of this and they've navigated it pretty well, obviously, with the iPhone being the most dominant part of anything they've ever done. But with AI, that may change the landscape so much that Google is disrupted in a way they can't ever recover. And the bureaucracy of an organization like that, I think, prevents them from pivoting to that type of a new technology, whatever the dominant platform is or where the new space is.
I think the bigger challenge for Google is they have become afflicted with a more acute than usual case of large organization disease, right? Like the reports from people who are internal or who have left is just, it's extremely difficult to get anything done. There's very little ambition internally. Lots of people want to just not work very hard and, get paid a nice salary. There's all sorts of problems around program or product managers, in order to get their promotion, need to launch new products. So Google's constantly launching new products because that's what the internal incentives are for, but then the products don't work out, so they kill them. So now Google has a reputation for killing everything they launch. They're finally tamping down on some of the internal social activism that has been plaguing a lot of Silicon Valley companies. but it took them an extremely long time to do that. It might be too little, too late. So I think, just it's those sort of there's a type of institutional sclerosis that seems to affect every large organization, but different organizations have it better or worse, and Google has the somewhat worse, case of it. So
Well,
that's
they would be the leaders in AI if their internal
might have been.
culture, because I mean, they had the team that wrote the paper,
Sure.
and that team left out of frustration mostly.
Yeah.
So
And you
yeah,
saw what happened with Gemini, where they launched it, and it seemed like a whole lot of the effort had gone into making sure it was woke enough, and then they went so far that it became a laughingstock.
They just did a recent, like, I don't know, annual demo or whatever, and I thought I saw them just about in the last few seconds of one of these videos about to revive Google Glass.
Uh-huh.
And it looked really cool, honestly. I mean, that, maybe they will jump onto that another S curve. I like that metaphor, of jumping onto new S curves. I think, go back to Steve's question about valuation. I think the valuation of these companies pretty much assumes that they're going to jump to the next S curve. I don't think that I think the PE ratios, I mean, I haven't checked recently, but are just too high to be supported by the existing businesses. I think
They're
the
being
market,
valued like growth stocks, not
yeah,
value stocks. Yeah.
right. And so the market, if we're right to be concerned about whether they have the ability to jump to those S curves, then the market may be too optimistic. But anyway, I don't know I don't know. Did you see that demo of their latest AI, the multimodal AI that kind of is seeing stuff in real time? And so somebody says, "Can you find my glasses?" And it
This
finds
is
the
the Google
glasses.
demo. I haven't seen the recent Google demo.
Yeah.
Google seems to be faking demos these days, so I don't
Well,
know.
they were criticized for that before, and I think they sort of tried to, you know,
Tried to do
not do that with the latest one. But um, I think if you had AI doing what if my glasses all of a sudden are making inferences about what's in front of me and telling me about them, eh, I don't know, that seemed pretty cool. So it
Yeah,
could
sure. I mean,
be.
I think, people make fun of the Google Glass because it was a little clunky. You looked a little dorky doing it. Some of the first pictures that came out were of some dorky people, wearing
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
And it triggered everybody's fears of, surveillance and privacy invasion. And so it got, you couldn't wear them in a bar, you'd get thrown out or whatever. But I think, that gave the whole concept a bad name. But I think the concept of having some camera and other electronics in your glasses or in something else that you wear so it sees what you see, that seems almost inevitable. And Facebook has the some pair of Ray-Bans now that does this, right? And has the camera built in. I think it's going to happen. It's just going to come back in some different form. I mean, the other thing about Google Glass was it wasn't actually very good. I think the technology wasn't quite there yet. I tried it once and it just, was a very small low res screen. The user interaction was just not perfected. So I think another generation or two of the technology and it'll just be much better. You integrate it with AI. I mean, okay, so OpenAI's latest demo had this thing where you can have a live real-time conversation with the AI and it can be looking at the scene. Also, you can have a camera pointed at yourself, say, what do you think of this outfit, or whatever, right? I mean, you can have all kinds of blind people can point it out a camera out at the world and say, describe where I am and explain where I need to go, or whatever like that.
Yeah.
So I think like a natural evolution of that is, well, of course, you just want to have the glasses with the camera where the AI can see whatever you are looking at right now. And it's just this constant companion, like, Jarvis in the Iron Man movies, right? And it just, and you can just at any time you can just ask it questions relevant to your current experience, and it's there, and it sees what you see, and so it just seems like a very natural development. I bet it's going to happen.
Okay, do we have any other questions, comments? All right, well, thanks, Jason. That was a fun discussion.
Yeah.
All right,
Thanks for having me on.
okay,
Yeah. So long, everybody.
bye.